My name is Lillian May Carter, and I am 102 years old now. When people hear that number, they usually pause for a moment, like they're trying to picture what a life that long must feel like. The truth is, it doesn't feel like a number to me. It feels like a long road behind me, full of quiet mornings, hard seasons, small joys, and lessons that only time can teach. I was born in a world that moved slower than the one you live in today. Life back then wasn't always easy, but it was simple in ways that are hard to explain now. When I was a little girl, there wasn't much extra in our home. We didn't have fancy things or many comforts, but we had something that mattered more than that. We had responsibility. We had patience, and we had people who looked after one another. Before I ever learned to worry about my own needs, I learned how to help my mother with hers. I carried water from the pump. I swept the floors until the dust settled into the sunlight coming through the window. I helped prepare food and watched closely as the older folks handled the work of the day. Let me pause here for a moment and ask you something. As you're listening to this story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are today. I'm always curious to know who is on the other side of these words and what stage of life you might be in. Back then, learning didn't always happen inside a classroom. Some days you had books, and those were good days. But other days, your lessons came from simply watching the adults around you do what they had to do to keep life moving forward. I remember sitting quietly in the corner while the grown folks talked about work, about family, about problems they had to solve before the sun went down. I learned early that listening can teach you just as much as speaking. By the time I was a young woman, work had already shaped my hands. Not the kind of work that sits behind a desk, but the kind that fills your day from morning until night. My hands carried buckets, washed clothes, cleaned floors, and prepared meals. Hard work has a way of teaching you patience, whether you ask for the lesson or not. Your body gets tired, but your mind learns to stay steady. Life kept moving the way it always does. I fell in love when I was still young enough to believe the world had plenty of time ahead of me. His name was Daniel Carter, and he was a quiet man with kind eyes and a steady way of speaking. We didn't have much when we married, but we had determination. We built our life piece by piece, the way most families did back then. The years passed the way years always pass, slow when you're living them, fast when you look back. We raised children. We worked long days. We worried about bills and harvests and whether the winter would be too cold that year. But we also laughed at the dinner table, shared stories before bed, and held on to the little routines that make a house feel like a home. Not every chapter of life is gentle, though. I lived long enough to see people I loved leave this world. Friends I grew up with slowly disappeared from the circle of familiar faces. My parents passed. Later, my husband did too. Losing people is a quiet kind of pain that doesn't make much noise, but it stays with you. I remember the day after Daniel was gone. The house felt bigger than it ever had before, and the silence was heavier than I expected. For a long time, I thought I wouldn't know how to move forward. But something about living a long life teaches you this truth. The days keep arriving, whether you're ready for them or not. So I kept getting up. Every morning I washed my face. I opened the window and let fresh air into the room. I stepped outside slowly and felt the ground beneath my feet. Those small acts might not sound important, but they were reminders that life was still happening around me. Now at 102, I won't pretend I move the way I once did. My legs don't hurry anywhere. My hands are slower when they reach for things, and I certainly don't understand half the little machines and glowing screens people carry around these days. But I still move. Movement changes when you grow older. It becomes quieter, slower, more careful, but it still matters. In the mornings, I stand up slowly and stretch my arms toward the ceiling just to wake my body up. I walk from one room to another, holding onto the furniture when I need to. Some days my steps are shorter than they were the day before, but they are still steps. Food for me has always been simple. I never developed a taste for anything too fancy. My meals are the same kinds of meals my grandmother used to prepare many years ago. Warm vegetable soup, collard greens cooked slowly, a baked potato with a little butter, sometimes a small piece of fish when I feel like it. I don't eat large plates the way younger people do. My appetite is quieter now, but I eat carefully, choosing foods that make my body feel steady rather than heavy. People often ask about my memory. They want to know how someone my age keeps their mind from fading away completely. I'll tell you the honest truth. I don't remember everything. Anyone who says they do at my age is probably forgetting something. But I try to work with my mind the same way I work with my body. Some mornings I sit in my chair near the window and count slowly in my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10. Not because I'm trying to prove anything to anyone, but because it reminds me that my thoughts are still moving. I read a little when my eyes allow it, not long chapters like I used to, just a few lines at a time, so the words stay familiar. I've had the same Bible on my table for decades now, and sometimes I read the same verse over and over again. Repeating something simple can keep your mind steady in ways people often overlook. Music helps too. Sometimes in the quiet afternoons, I hum an old hymn that I learned when I was a child, sitting beside my mother in church. My voice isn't strong anymore, but that doesn't matter. The melody still finds its way through the room, and for a moment it feels like time folds in on itself. Another thing I learned somewhere along the way is not to carry anger for too long. Anger is heavy. When you're young, you think you have the strength to hold on to it forever. But the older you get, the more you realize how exhausting that weight can be. I decided many years ago that peace was a better companion than resentment. So when someone wronged me, I tried to let the moment pass rather than let it grow roots inside my heart. That choice made my days lighter. I stayed active for as long as my body allowed it. I walked whenever there was somewhere to go. I cleaned my home even when it would have been easier to ignore the dust. I kept my hands busy because busy hands remind the mind that life still has purpose. These days I move slower, but I pay closer attention. I notice the sound of the wind moving through the trees outside my window. I notice the warmth of sunlight on the floor in the afternoon. I notice the quiet comfort of a cup of tea resting in my hands. Longevity, at least in my experience, isn't about doing everything. It's about doing enough for a very long time. And if you're still breathing today, no matter how old you are, then life is still giving you another moment to live with care. There were many mornings in my life when I woke up before the sun even touched the sky. In the early years, it wasn't because I wanted to wake up so early. It was simply because life required it. Work waited for no one, and the day always felt shorter than the list of things that needed to be done. I remember tying my shoes quietly so I wouldn't wake the children, stepping outside into the cool morning air, and beginning the day before the world fully opened its eyes. Those mornings taught me something I didn't understand at the time. When you begin your day with purpose, even a small purpose, your mind wakes up in a different way. It becomes alert. It becomes ready. And over the years, those quiet beginnings helped shape the rhythm of my life. Daniel used to say that a steady routine keeps a person grounded. He believed that the body and the mind both appreciate knowing what comes next. At the time, I didn't think much about those words, but the longer I lived, the more I realized how true they were. Our days followed simple patterns: breakfast in the kitchen while the morning light came through the window. Work through the afternoon, whether it was tending to chores around the house or helping neighbors when they needed an extra pair of hands. Evenings were quieter. We would sit together, sometimes speaking, sometimes just listening to the sounds of the night settling over the neighborhood. There's a comfort in those kinds of routines that people today sometimes forget about. Life now seems to move quickly from one thing to another, but back then we understood the value of slowing down long enough to notice the moment we were in. As the years passed, the world around us changed faster than we expected. New machines arrived, roads expanded. Technology grew in ways that felt almost unbelievable to someone who remembered life before electricity was common in many homes. At times, it felt like the world was racing forward while I was simply trying to keep my footing. But I learned that you don't have to keep up with everything in order to live well. You only need to keep up with the parts of life that truly matter. When my children grew older and built families of their own, the house slowly became quieter again. That kind of silence can feel strange at first. For years, your days are filled with voices, footsteps, and laughter. Then one day you look around and realize the rooms echo a little more than they used to. But silence is not always loneliness. Sometimes silence is simply space. Space to think, space to remember, space to notice the small details that once passed by unnoticed when life was busier. In those quieter years, I began paying closer attention to how my body and my mind were changing. Aging is not something that happens all at once. It arrives slowly, like the turning of seasons. One year you notice your knees ache a little more when you stand up. Another year you realize your eyesight needs a little more light to read the same words you once saw easily. At first, those changes can make you feel frustrated, but fighting against time never really works. The better choice is learning how to move with it. So I adjusted. When my legs grew slower, I stopped rushing. When my hands became weaker, I chose tasks that still felt comfortable instead of trying to prove something to myself. I learned to respect the limits my body was setting while still encouraging it to move. One of the simplest habits I kept was walking. Not long walks the way I once took when I was younger, just small walks inside the house or across the yard. Even standing up and sitting back down became its own little exercise. People often underestimate how powerful those small movements can be. The body remembers motion. When you keep it moving, even gently, it reminds your mind that life is still active inside you. The mind needs similar care. I've noticed that when people retire from work or slow down later in life, they sometimes stop challenging their thoughts. They watch the world instead of participating in it. But the mind is like a garden. If you stop tending to it, things begin to fade. That's why I created small habits to keep my thoughts awake. Some days I say the days of the week out loud, just to hear them clearly in my own voice. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all the way through Sunday. It may sound simple, but those little exercises help keep your memory connected to the present moment. Other days, I read short passages from books I've owned for many years. The pages are worn now, but the familiarity of those words brings comfort. Reading even a few sentences can wake up parts of the mind that might otherwise stay quiet. And of course, prayer has always been a steady companion in my life. Not long speeches or complicated thoughts, just quiet conversations with God, the way I've done since I was a child, sitting beside my mother in church. Faith doesn't erase difficulties, but it does offer a place where your worries can rest for a while. Another thing that helped me stay present all these years was conversation. Talking with people, even briefly, keeps the heart open. It reminds you that you're still connected to the world outside your own thoughts. When neighbors visit, I listen carefully to their stories. When family members call, I make sure to say their names clearly and remember the little details they share. Memory and connection are closely tied together. The more we interact with others, the more reasons our mind has to stay active. Of course, there were times when I felt tired of everything. Living a long life means witnessing a lot of change, and sometimes that change feels overwhelming. I've seen neighborhoods transform, traditions disappear, and ways of life that once seemed permanent slowly fade away. But even through all those changes, some truths remained the same. Kindness still matters, patience still matters, and the way we care for our bodies and minds today quietly shapes the years we may live tomorrow. When I look back now, I don't believe there was any single secret that carried me to this age. No magic diet, no special trick, no miracle formula. It was simply a collection of small choices repeated over and over again across many decades. Getting up when it would have been easier to stay in bed. Moving my body even when it felt slow. Speaking with people instead of closing myself off. Letting go of anger before it hardened into something heavier. And appreciating the simple parts of life that often go unnoticed. A warm meal, a quiet morning, a familiar song playing softly in the background. These things may seem small, but when you gather enough of them together, they become the fabric of a long and meaningful life. As the years continued to pass, I began to notice something about time that most people don't realize when they're young. When you are in your 20s or 30s, a year feels long. It feels like something you can spend carelessly because there will always be another one waiting behind it. But when you live long enough, you understand that years are not endless. They are quiet gifts, and each one carries a little less certainty than the last. By the time I reached my 90s, many of the people who once filled my life had already gone. Old friends I laughed with as a girl were no longer here to share memories. Neighbors who used to wave from their porches had disappeared from the streets I once knew so well. Even the places themselves had changed. Buildings were replaced. Roads widened. The world I grew up in slowly transformed into something almost unrecognizable. At first, those changes can make a person feel like they no longer belong to the world around them. But over time, I realized something important. Belonging isn't tied to a place or an era. It comes from the way you continue to live inside whatever moment you've been given. So I stopped comparing the present to the past. Instead, I began focusing on what was still here. The sunlight that reaches my window every morning is the same sunlight that warmed my face when I was a child. The sound of birds outside my home hasn't changed at all, even though everything else seems different. Nature has a way of reminding us that life continues, quietly and patiently, whether we notice it or not. That realization brought me a kind of peace I didn't expect. People often ask me what it feels like to live this long. They imagine there must be some great secret or complicated answer waiting behind all those years. But the truth is simpler than most people want to believe. Living a long life isn't about chasing something extraordinary. It's about taking care of the ordinary things again and again. Take your body, for example. When you're young, your body feels strong enough to handle anything. You stay up too late, eat whatever you want, and rush through your days without thinking about the cost. But your body remembers everything. Every habit, every routine, every moment you either cared for it or ignored it. I didn't always understand that when I was younger, but I did learn to respect my body over time. I used it while I had the strength. I worked with my hands. I walked instead of sitting whenever possible. And when age finally slowed me down, I didn't punish myself for it. I simply adjusted and kept moving in smaller ways. Even now, at 102, I make sure my body knows it is still needed. Some mornings I stand near the edge of my bed and stretch my arms gently. Other mornings I walk slowly from the bedroom to the kitchen and back again, holding onto the wall when I need to. These actions may look small to someone younger, but they are reminders that life is still moving through me. The mind requires that same gentle attention. Many people believe memory fades suddenly, like a light turning off, but most of the time it fades quietly when it stops being used. That's why I keep giving my mind small things to do each day. Sometimes I count slowly from 1 to 10, just to feel the rhythm of numbers passing through my thoughts. Other times I repeat the names of people I love, saying them softly so they remain close to my memory. I also continue reading little pieces of scripture the way I have done for most of my life, not because I feel obligated, but because the repetition brings calmness to my thoughts. Familiar words have a way of anchoring the mind when everything else feels uncertain. Music helps too. Even now, I occasionally hum the old church hymns I learned as a girl. My voice is softer now, and the notes sometimes come out uneven, but the melodies still carry meaning. They connect the person I am today with the young girl I once was, sitting beside her mother many decades ago. Another lesson that helped me reach this age is learning how to release things that don't belong in the heart for too long. Anger, resentment, bitterness. Those emotions can sit inside a person for years if they allow them to. But carrying that weight only makes the journey harder. I decided long ago that peace was a better companion than pride. When someone hurt me, I tried to forgive sooner rather than later, not because the pain disappeared immediately, but because holding on to it would only make my own life heavier. Peace gives your mind room to breathe, and a peaceful mind ages more gently than one filled with constant worry. I also believe that staying connected to other people keeps the spirit alive. Even small conversations matter. A short phone call with family, a neighbor stopping by to check in, a friendly voice asking how your day is going. These interactions remind us that we are still part of the world around us. Memory often follows connection. When we speak with others, we naturally remember names, stories, and shared experiences. Those moments keep our thoughts moving and our hearts open. Now, when people ask me if I have advice for them, I usually smile because advice can only go so far. Every life follows its own path, but there are a few things I truly believe helped carry me this far.